family practitioner. Welcome to Holding the Work, Reflections for Child and Family Practitioners. My name is Ashleigh and I'm a children's therapist and social worker and supervisor. I created this podcast as a reflective space for practitioners working with children, parents and families. So whether you're a social worker, counsellor, play therapist, psychologist, case manager, or any other practitioner who works with children and families, this podcast is a place for us to pause, think about the work, and keep growing in ways that are trauma-informed, relational, and honours the people that we work with, as well as you as a practitioner. I'm recording this episode of the podcast on Wellbeing country in the Hobart area of lutruwita, Tasmania. I acknowledge the Palawa and Pakana peoples as the traditional owners of the country that I'm working on today. And I pay my respects to elders past and present and express my gratitude for the knowledge, wisdom and law that has been and continues to be shared with us on this country. Thank you for joining me for this episode of the podcast. I'm really glad that you're here. So every now and then in my practice, whether it's play therapy, counselling, supervision, or connecting with a parent, I can feel that it isn't just me and the other person in the room. Alongside the work that's happening in front of me, I can feel that something within me has been stirred up too. A younger part, a grieving part, maybe a protective part, even a part that's been traumatized. A part of me that recognizes something in what is unfolding in the room. So if you do this work, or any work really, with children and families, I imagine that you've had this feeling too. So there have been times in my own practice when I can recall little 4-year-old Ashleigh has felt really close. There's been times where those grieving parts of me have felt close too. Sometimes there's even been those traumatized parts of me I can feel have come close and come near, because something in the room or in that session has really resonated with my own story. So I've spoken about this before if you've listened to my other podcast episodes or read some of my blog posts about a session that I've had with a young child. And I remember this one session in particular where the child was expressing feelings of terror and helplessness through their play. And during this particular session, as I sat there, I could feel my own traumatized parts becoming present. And I noticed an urge to step in quickly, to stop what was happening, to protect my own parts of me, and to move away from what was unfolding in the session and what felt hard. But instead of reacting from that place, that protective place, I took a breath. I steadied myself long enough to stay with what was happening. And I chose to move gently towards the discomfort that was happening rather than away from it. And I spoke with care and curiosity about the fear that seemed to be in the room. So that moment has stayed with me because it reminded me of something important. Part of being a therapist isn't not just learning about how to hold the child or the parent that we might be working with. It's also learning how to hold ourselves in our work as well. And honestly, I don't think we speak about that enough in our line of work. And I don't think holding ourselves comes naturally for most of us either. It's something that we learn over time. something that we learn slowly in supervision, in reflection, in our own therapy maybe. In the moments where we take not time to notice ourselves being pulled, activated, protective, overwhelmed, or tender, and we notice and we choose to meet those with awareness rather than shame. So in this particular episode of the podcast, I wanted to share with you 3 gentle ways to work with those parts of yourself that might show up in the therapy room, in your work. So this is so you don't ever feel activated by the work. That's not what this episode is about, but so you can stay grounded in it. So it's so you can practice in a way that remains trauma responsive, sustainable, and compassionate to both the child or the client that you might be working with and for yourself. So the first place I want to start is by starting with awareness. So I think one of the most important things that we can remember is that children and families not only experience our interventions, they experience us as people. They experience our presence, our nervous system, our pace, our warmth, our boundaries, our ability to stay with them, and sometimes our struggle to stay with them too. So I talk more about this particular aspect of our work over in a previous episode of the podcast, but also on my blog around how culture, gender, and history impacts our practice. So this is why I think awareness matters so much in our work. When something gets stirred in us, it can show up as a strong emotional response. It can show up as an urge to maybe rescue or to fix or to shut something down, maybe to move away or to be overprotective. And sometimes it looks like suddenly feeling frozen or confused or irritated or a bit more emotional than what you thought you'd be. So these moments don't mean that you're doing bad work or bad therapy or that you're doing anything wrong, that you're not cut out for it. Often these moments are really invitations for us to become more curious about ourselves. And we can ask ourselves, what was that particular moment touching in me? What feels familiar here? What part of me has come closer? And what am I feeling pulled to do? The more we can understand ourselves, the more choice we have in how we respond. And building this kind of awareness might happen through journaling after sessions, through supervision, through your own therapy, or simply just pausing long enough to notice what's happening in your body and emotions. So awareness is where so much of this work begins. So the next thing I want to talk about is around acknowledgement and acknowledging what's there. So once you notice that part of you is present, the next step isn't to push away. It's to really acknowledge it. Maybe gently, quietly, without being judgmental of it. Sometimes an activated part of us just needs to be noticed. Not indulged, not handed control of the session, just noticed. There's something powerful about being able to say to yourself, even silently, I know you're here. I can feel this is touching something important, but right now I need to stay here for this child or family, and I'll come back to you when I can, when I have space. I really value this kind of inner acknowledgement because it creates a relationship with ourselves that's compassionate rather than being judgmental or harsh. So many of us have learnt to override ourselves in helping professions, maybe to keep going, to stay composed, to minimize what is happening to us internally within our bodies. But when we ignore our own internal responses completely, they often find other ways to show up. They can show up in the form of urgency, being reactive, over-functioning, defensiveness, maybe emotional exhaustion, or even through interventions or choices that we make that are more about soothing our own feelings of discomfort rather than staying with the client's process. Acknowledgement helps create pause, and that pause can give us more room to respond more thoughtfully rather than react in a way that's coming from whatever part of us that has been activated. But when that session is over, it matters that we come back and really follow through on that promise that we've made to ourselves. So this might look like a few quiet moments to ourselves, or maybe writing something down in your journal if that's what you do. Again, maybe it could be bringing it to supervision. It could be going for a walk, sitting in stillness, debriefing, crying, just letting yourself feel whatever it was that has been stirred. Acknowledgement in the session is important, but so is the care afterwards. So the last thing that I want to speak about is around protecting the parts of ourselves that need protecting. So sometimes the parts that we have within us carry pain, trauma, fear, grief, or vulnerability. These might be younger parts of us. They might be adult parts of us carrying old wounds. Sometimes those parts don't need to be fully exposed to the content that we observe and witness in our work. Not every part of us needs to come into the therapy room, and not every part of us is meant to be on the front line of this work. Sometimes what's needed here is protection. So one practice that you can do, and it's something that I find really helpful, is through visualization. So what this means is before a session, or when you notice something being stirred up, you might imagine taking that vulnerable part of yourself to somewhere safe. So that might be a quiet room, a warm home somewhere, a garden, somewhere calm, steady and protected. And you might imagine that part being looked after while you're at work, on the front line, in sessions maybe. You might also imagine calling forward the parts of yourself that you need in the room. That could be your grounded adult self, your therapist self, your wise, compassionate, steady self, the part of you that can stay present without becoming overwhelmed. So this particular practice isn't about denying your vulnerability. It's about caring for it. It's about recognizing that our own inner self deserves tenderness and compassion too. And when we learn how to protect the parts of ourselves that need care, we can make this work more sustainable. I think sometimes we imagine well-being as practitioners is something that's separate from the therapy room. Something we attend to maybe after the fact, on weekends, on leave, once we're already tired. But so much of our well-being as a practitioner or therapist is really shaped in the moment, in the here and now. It's in how we notice ourselves, how we respond to our own activation when we become activated. It's how we relate to those parts of us that get stirred up by the work that we do. It's whether we meet those parts with shame or with compassion. It's not about becoming perfectly neutral or untouched by the stories that are in front of us or by what we witness in our sessions. That's not the goal. That's not what I'm talking about. The goal really isn't to not feel nothing. The goal is to know ourselves well enough that when something does get stirred, we can stay present, reflective, ethical, and kind. And for those of us who care deeply about the children and the families we work with, it's also part of protecting our capacity to keep showing up. So over this next week, or whenever you get a chance, I'd highly encourage you to maybe take some time to reflect on what tends to get stirred up for you during sessions, or what kind of stories or dynamics feel especially close to home. How do you know when there's a younger, grieving, fearful, or protective part of you that's present? And what helps you to stay grounded enough to remain connected or remain present with the client? They're not small questions, but they're important ones, because the work is not only about how we hold others, it's about how we learn to hold ourselves as well. So thank you so much for spending this time with me on this particular episode of the podcast. If this episode has stirred anything up for you, or you'd like a space where you can reflect on those parts of you that do get stirred up in the playroom, or you want to deepen your self-awareness and keep growing into the kind of therapist that you want to be, one-on-one supervision might be a really supportive and helpful next step. And sometimes those parts of ourselves that do show up in the therapy room do need a space that feels steady, thoughtful, confidential, where you can slow down, reflect, and just make sense of what the work is bringing up for you. I'm available for one-on-one supervision if you feel like you need that type of space. So please do reach out to me at Children's Therapy Taz via email or my social media, whichever way works for you. And yeah, we can explore together whether I might be a good fit for you, or unpack a little bit about what it is that you're needing. All right, until next time, please take care. Bye.